Alright, shalom to the Israelite community that know truth. This is to them ignorant so-called blacks and African Americans. You got to put extra emphasis on showing them things because for some reason they got the spirit of slumber and they don't want to wake up. But I'm sure that by now, in this date and time, that just about everybody that's so-called black or African American ran across somebody that say we are Hebrew Israelites. We are Hebrew Israelites. Now you might have done brushed it aside and didn't pay no attention to it because you've been comfortable as a black or African American or a Negro. You comfortable with the slave heritage that your slave owners and their descendants then gave you. But it's time to wake up. It's time to wake up now. And I'm sure you done ran across people that's been saying we are Hebrew Israelites, the people from the transatlantic slave trade. I've been doing this for over almost 30 years now. And I done touched ground with a lot of so-called blacks, African Americans, and then they just ignorant and don't want to change. You know what I'm saying? And they comfortable with the heritage that was given to them. Well, I'm finna show you in step-by-step detail how we are the Israelites. Now, some of this history that I'm gonna show is gonna conflict with the people that they call camps. Now this is the thing. Now this is what's confusing to a lot of Israelites that be searching their heritage and trying to connect. The so-called blacks or African Americans that be trying to connect to their Israelite heritage as they run across the Israelite organizations that called camps. They're called camps, and then you see them walking around and they mostly be on corners hollering at folks. Well, if a so-called black or African American trying to wake up to their Israelite heritage and they stumble across their information, then they ain't gonna come in the heritage. And then that's why come a lot of so-called blacks or African Americans reject their Israelite heritage, is because they look at the camps in the history that they show and kind of like common sense kick in. They say, well, that ain't us, and they don't feel comfortable with that history that they show. And the reason is because those Israelite groups be using the Jewish people heritage. They be using the Jewish people's history, and a lot of Israelites intuition inside you just tell them, man, that this ain't right and this ain't right. And you're pretty smart. You're pretty smart about that. Is that you can, you feel that ain't right. And a lot of Israelites, man, be using their history. A lot of Israelites be using the group called Ashkenazi history. They be using their history. And Israelites, it's kind of smart in the sense is that they don't want, that history that the camps use, and I'm going to show you the truth, and that you can search in Tanakh and you can come to the conclusion that I have without using the Jewish people's history. You see, the Jewish people's got a history. And a lot of the Israelites just disregard their history. They just disregard their history because they don't really know. They don't really know. And they know that it ain't right, but because they don't know and they don't know how to get around it, is that they just, just brush past that and then just start using those people's history. But what a lot of Israelites don't know is that we abandoned our heritage to those groups, the Jewish community that's called the Jewish community. We abandoned our heritage to them in what's called the Babylonian Wars. We went into Africa to do the Egyptian religion. Now, a lot of the camps, they don't know this. They don't know this, and they think that the history that they're using is it's foolproof, but it's not. You know, and they don't know that they using the Jewish community history when they started that we went into Africa in 70 AD when Herd Edomite temple was destroyed. And then you have a lot of Israelites, you know, using that history, and they don't know. And they don't know, and they really ain't trying to find out. You know, they use this history right there, you know, the 10 lost tribes, and that we went into Africa in 70 AD. You know, that's the history that the camps use. And then if you read and study that history, you'll see that that's the same identical history that the Jewish community has. You know, the Jewish community has that same history. So, you know, that kind of make a lot of Israelites back up, and they don't want to come into an Israelite heritage, which is kind of smart because, you know, they don't want to use the other people's history. Well, I'm going to show you what really happened. You know what really happened, and this is how you're an Israelite. You know, it is because in what's called the Babylonian Wars around about 588 BC, around about that time, the whole Israelite nation decided not to do the covenant no more, and that they was gonna go into Africa to do the Egyptian religion. You know, it's documented in the Tanakh. This is the history before the 70 AD so-called Exodus. You know, a lot of Israelites believe in that 70 AD Exodus, that Herd Edomite temple was holy, and that we were so distraught that the Romans destroyed it that we ran across North Africa and settled into Spain and Portugal. You know, that's going to be the hardest history, these people's right here. That's going to be their history. And the Ashkenazi just latch on to it because people don't, they try not to make a distinction between those two groups. You know, Ashkenazi was called Scythian in the BC days. And when we ran into Africa, because they chased us into Africa, they was called Scythians. They was called Scythians, and they settled in what's called Scythopolis. Scythopolis. It was head of the Discopolis cities. It's mentioned throughout what's called the New Testament. You know, we Israelites had ran into Africa, you know, by them, you know, doing what's called the Babylonian Wars. You know, they chased us into Africa by the will of Almighty Yah. You know, Almighty Yah told them to chase us off the land. You know, and then they chased us off the land, and then they left a lot of arrows. Man, they shot a lot of arrows at us. You know, they shot a lot of arrows, and these are the places that the arrows been found of lately that are just strictly from Ashkenazi during the Babylonian Wars, you know. Alright, now, let's go into this here history. Now, this is how you are Israelite, you know, so you don't have to be ignorant. You don't have to be that ignorant black or African American that don't know their heritage. You know, it's easy for you to wake up out of your slavery created mentality. You know, it's easy for you to wake up out of it, and I'm going to show you how. You know, some of you going to continue to be a slave-minded, created person that hate truth and love your slavery heritage, that love your slave owner for the false history that he done gave you, because you don't have to think and you don't have to do anything but accept it. They give you holidays. Man, they give you a slavery diet that's against the Tanakh, against what Prophet Moses say. Man, they do a whole lot of stuff to you ignorant so-called blacks, African Americans. They got the slave created mentality. But this is how you Israelite. You know, everybody is familiar with biblical history. You know about Jacob's sons that went into Egypt and then sojourned there, and then when they exodus Egypt, and then was going into the promised land. This would be, you know what I'm saying, right there, the land that they call Israel today. But we know Israel is a people, and I got a satellite map that shows it. You know, after we left this part of Egypt, and then we would go settle in these parts right here. You know, that's this land right there. And that, you know, we stayed there for about 850 something years. You know, is the history that the Tanakh got from Exodus all the way to the book of Jeremiah. You know, the book of Jeremiah is going to be our basically the last time that we was on the promised land, you know, before we was driven out. But if you read the Torah, which is the 5 books, you know, that'll be Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And you know, you read them books, you'll see that the Creator, when He was giving us the law, that He explicitly told us that if you don't go into the promised land and follow these teachings that Moses is giving you, that you will be ran out. And now after you get to reading the history from Joshua and First Samuel and Second Samuel's, and then Chronicles and First Chronicles and Second Chronicles, and then First Kings and Second Kings, you'll see the history of our people and how they basically didn't do right. They didn't do right, you know, and that they chose, you know, to follow the other people's gods and so forth. Well, it was a punishment set out that if we should do that, what would happen to us. And then this is how we know that we are Israelites, is because our history is identical to the curses that Prophet Moses say would be on the Israelites if they, you know, broke the covenant, or when they broke the covenant. And we know that we was told that we will break the covenant because you can see this in the Tanakh history. Now the Tanakh is going to be from Genesis all the way to the book of Malachi. That's the history that we Israelites are responsible for, you know. And then if you go to Deuteronomy 31, you know, you'll read, well, we're from Exodus to Deuteronomy, you'll see that how the Israelites wasn't, you know, real smart with following the instructions that the Creator gave us, and how we rebelled, men, against Prophet Moses, who was the Creator's spokesperson to us, who gave us the contract, and how we rebelled against him, and how we gave him a hard time, and then how we basically wanted to go back into bondage. That's why come it's easily for you Israelites to have a slave-like mentality, because we are the same people that wanted to go back into bondage and abandon, you know, the freedom that was given to us by the Creator. And what a wonderful system that He set up for us, because we didn't have to pay no taxes, and we had our own land, and you can grow your own food, and could nobody come take your land. And that, you know, even if you made a mistake and lost your land because of your ignorance, that your land would come back to you after 7 years. You know, it's called the Jubilee. And that we can get our land back. And man, He gave us a beautiful system that was anti-capitalism, because, you know, we didn't have to sell and try to generate money to live. And how He had gave us land, man, to live on, where you can grow your crops, you can have your animals, and we was rich like that, far as in food and so forth, you know. And then, you know, we could trade somehow food for gold and so forth. But, you know, we lost that because we chose to do the other people's religion, which led to slavery. And it was prophesied that we would do that because, like I said, up on exiting Egypt with Prophet Moses that we didn't do right. Man, we just didn't do right. And you can read the stories in Exodus. You can read the stories in the book of Joshua after Prophet Moses passed away, how our ignorance continued. We even start worshiping the Egyptian religion when Moses disappeared, to go get the law. So the Creator was kind of like, he knew that we wasn't gonna do right and that we was gonna end up getting the punishment that he stipulated that's in the book of Deuteronomy. I think I can show you how that we didn't do right and chose to do what the Egyptians did, because remember, we had been there for a little while. You know what I'm saying? That's like the Israelites been in captivity for a little while here in America, and they didn't just forgot their origin or where we come from and so forth. And I'm gonna show that where we come from is just an extension of our homeland, and then how we ran into Africa to be enslaved, as the Creator said what happened. But this is what we did, up on Moses going to get the law, and that we couldn't do right. We didn't want to do right. All right, so, look, this is Exodus 32. And when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down out of the mountain, the people gathered themselves together unto Aaron and said unto him, Up and make us gods which shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we want not what is become of him. And Aaron, said, break off your earrings and your nose earrings and your sons and wives and your daughters and bring them unto me. And then he made the golden calf, which is Is and Horus. Is and Horus is going to be the same religion that Christianity was taken from, the mother and child worship, and that golden calf was just a representation of it, and then if you're pretty familiar with what happened after Exodus, it was a terrible thing, and then that was one of the reasons why the Creator would set out the curses. There got to be chapter 28 of Deuteronomy. If we should violate the covenant that he gave Prophet Moses, what would happen to us? And we can see that the Creator knew that we would break the covenant. If you go to Deuteronomy 31:17. And it says, Then my anger shall be kindled against them in that day, and I will forsake them, and I will hide my face from them. And well, look, 16, Deuteronomy 31:16. And Elohim said unto Moses, Behold, thou shalt sleep with thy fathers, and this people will rise up and go a-whoring after the gods of the strangers of the land, whither they go to be among them, and will forsake me and break my covenant which I have made with them. Now, this is after he done told us, about the curses. That's in chapter 28 of Deuteronomy. Look, then my anger shall be kindled against them in that day, and I will forsake them, and I will hide my face from them, and they shall be devoured, and many evils and troubles shall befall them. You see that saying? And this is what Prophet Moses say. For I know that after my death ye will utterly corrupt yourselves, and turn aside from the way which I have commanded you, and evil shall befall you in the latter days, because you didn't do what the Creator say. And evil, and because you did evil in the sight of the Elohim, to provoke him to anger through the works of your hands. So Prophet Moses told us that we will break the law. That's after he done set forth the curses. That's in Deuteronomy 28. Now, when you read Deuteronomy 28, you'll see that nobody's history is identical to the curses but the people from the transatlantic slave trade. They are the only people on the face of this earth whose history is identical to the curses that Prophet Moses will say. Not the Jewish community, not Sephardi, and not Sephardim. There's no recorded history of them going through identical curses and how they haven't been taken in chains and yokes on their neck to a strange land in ships and so forth, and then been forced to harvest crops and robbed continuously throughout their captivity. There's no history of now one of the groups, going through that, and only the people from the transatlantic slave trade been through that. Not nobody on the whole face of this earth. Not the people from China, not the people from India, not the people from Arabia, not the people from South Americas, and not the Europeans. They never had a history where they done been taken somewhere in yokes for 400 years and then forced into labor and then been continuously dogged out. That haven't happened to them. And the only reason that it happened to the people that's in what's called Africa is because the Israelites ran from that little part into Africa to hide after we done did bad on the land, and then we was chased out by Ashkenazi under the name Scythian. Alright, and then let me show y'all some of these curses and how it's easy to understand. Now, like I said, that a lot of you Israelites then looked at the camp history and then you don't feel connected to it. Is because it's not your history, and it's the Sephardi and Ashkenazi history. When they say that the people in the promised land was chased out in 70 AD, 70 AD and so forth, and that how it wasn't us. Alright, Deuteronomy chapter 28, and as you read down, the men said, and thou shalt not go aside from any of the words which I command thee this day, to the right hand or to the left, to go after other gods to serve them. But it shall come to pass, if Yah will not hearken unto the voice of the Elohim thy Yah, to observe, to do all his commandments and his statutes which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. Cursed shall thou be in the city, cursed shall thou be in the field, cursed shall be thy basket and in thy store, cursed shall be the fruit of thy body and the fruit of thy land. See, some of these curses happen in the land as well as in captivity. See, so it wasn't no escaping these curses. Look, the Elohim shall send upon thee curse. This is Deuteronomy 20. The Elohim shall send upon thee curse and vexation and rebuke, and all that thou sittest thou hand on for to do, until thou be destroyed, until thou perish quickly, because the wickedness of thy doings where thou hast forsaken me. And then you keep on reading down, and see, you get to 23. And thy heaven that is above thee shall be brass, and thy earth that is under thee shall be iron. And then that's what happened to us in Africa when we ran off the promised land during the Babylonian wars into Egypt and Africa, in the book of Jeremiah, that we was in these areas right here in lower Libya, because the League of Nations divided Africa up and gave Africa the nations that exist today. But back in the days, Egypt went all the way over into Libya. And you got pyramids in Libya that is connected to Egypt. And then how we was over here and the water dried up on us. And then we was forced to go man around, and we had conflict with the Hamite groups. And then, they sold us to the folks that come down from Spain after they was chased out of Spain by Ashkenazi and Sephardi. Been having proxy wars over the Israelite heritage, and Ashkenazi used Christianity, the Catholic Church, to give the Sephardis problems, who eventually created Islam, to fight back. But then, when we had went into Africa and we was in Africa for a little while, thinking that we were safe from Ashkenazi and them, that eventually them other folks got us. We ran from one folks and got enslaved by another group, but I'm gonna go into that a little later. All right. So these curses, that when Almighty Yah say that the water
dry up on you and heaven gonna dry up on us. That actually happened to us in Africa. Look, the Elohim will make the rain of thy land powder and dust. From heaven shall it come down upon thee until thou be destroyed. The Elohim shall cause thee to be smitten before thine enemies, and thou shalt go out one way against them, and flee 7 ways before them, and thou shalt be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth. You know that happened to us. You know, we was removed everywhere. Look, and the Elohim shall smite thee with madness and blindness and astonishment of heart, and thou shalt grope at noonday as the blind gropeth in darkness, and thou shalt not prosper in thy ways, and thou shalt be only oppressed and spoiled evermore, and no man shall save thee, and thou shalt betroth a wife, and another man shall lie with her. Thou shalt build an house, and thou shalt not dwell therein. You know, that happened to us. That happened to us in the slavery days. Look, thy son and thy daughter shall be given unto another people, and then eyes shall look and fail with longing for them all the day long, and there shall be no might in thine hand. You know, all of that happened to us in the slavery days. We the only people on the face of earth that happened to. Look, the Elohim shall bring thee and the king which thou shalt set over thee unto a nation, whether thou nor thy fathers have not known, and there shalt thou serve other gods, wood and stone. And it's a known fact that we didn't know anything about no demigods dying on a cross to save us and redeem us from our sins, or none of that stuff. We didn't know about none of that stuff in Moses' time or after, and how we only got those traditions and religions in the slavery days. Look, and thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword. See, that's where you get that term Negro, Black, African American, colored, and all those old false names to misidentify you with, is because that was a curse in the Bible. You see, so then if you identifying yourself as a Negro and a Black, then you still up under the curses that Prophet Moses say that will be on the Israelites, that will be subjected to that. See, and thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword among all the nations where the Elohim shall lead thee. So what do they call us? They call us Negroes, Blacks, African Americans, and all that old stuff. Look, and thou shalt beget sons and daughters, but thou shalt not enjoy them, for they shall go into captivity. And I was just finished watching an old slave recreated movie where they did just that, where they sold the mama one way, the kids, and everybody got sold in all kind of different directions. You know, the stranger that is within thee shall get up above thee very high, and thou shalt come down very low. You see, we ever wonder why all these strangers come to our neighborhood and buy up our stores and profit off us and do real good? Man, all kind of foreigners have been in our neighborhood and in our community owning stores. Now all the Palestinians and Arabs own all the stores in our community, in the folks from India. But before then, it was the Orientals, the Jewish community, the Caucasians, everybody owned the stores and all the businesses in our community, and then got up above us. That's because that was a curse. Look, the stranger, this Deuteronomy 43, the stranger that is within thee shall get up above thee very high, and thou shalt come down low. He shall lend to thee, and thou shalt not lend to him. He shall be the head, and thou shalt be the tail. Moreover, all these curses shall come upon thee, and shall pursue thee, and overtake thee till thou be destroyed, because of thou hearkenest not unto the voice of the Elohim thy Yah, to keep his commandments and his statutes, which he command thee. And they shall be upon thee for a sign and for a wonder. Now we know that them curses done been up on us all these time. We done been in America, so-called captivity, that we constantly being subjected, man, to all this hardships and so forth, because them was curses that the Creator say will be on the Israelites if they broke the covenant. Now, the only way to get them curses up off you is to come into your Israelite heritage and acknowledge the wrong that our ancestors did when they was on the promised land. Look, and look, therefore shalt thou serve thine enemies, which the Elohim shall send against thee in hunger and nakedness. Third, therefore shalt thou serve thine enemies, which the Elohim shall send against thee in hunger and in thirst and in nakedness and in want of all things, and he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck until he have destroyed thee. That's how we come over here on the slave ships, hungry, naked, thirsty, but because we was real thirsty, but because it wasn't nothing but salt water being transported from here all the way to here, taking 6 months, and we was naked, and we had a yoke on our neck, and it destroyed us as a people, just like the Tanakh say. So this why come it's easy to wake up to your Israelite heritage now. Look, the Elohim shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth, a nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand. Now, we just now starting to understand English, even though we speak a version of English called slang. You know, so look, man, the curses keep going on, and it explains what happened to us since our people been here in captivity. And we was enslaved. Now, let's go to the act of what caused it. You know, and you go to the book of Jeremiah. And then when you get to the book of Jeremiah, man, you start reading this history. Man, we was robbing, stealing, and killing from each other. We was worshiping the Egyptian religion since this brother named Jeroboam from the tribe of Ephraim went into Egypt and brung it out and put it on us. I say that the Egyptians had to do trade on the other side of the promised land with the people that share demigod worship, and how that we worship one Yah, that we was in their way. And it was killing the Egyptians because they just couldn't come across. So they tried to find all kind of ways to put us on their gods, to bring destruction upon us. And they finally did when his brother named Jeroboam went into Egypt. And then when he went back to the promised land, he put that golden calf stuff on us that we had worshipped during Moses' absence. And we made the golden calf. And then he put that on us. And then Jeroboam put it on the northern kingdom that's called the 10 tribes. You know, and it destroyed us. We was destroyed because like I say, the Egyptians had to do trade on the other side of us. Now, this is what sealed our faith. This is what sealed our faith. You know, we had been in the promised land for a good while, and then we started to have trouble. So we were starting to have trouble with these folks right here, Ashkenazi, that controlled Babylon. They made up the Babylonian army. They had destroyed Assyria, and now they was coming at us, a nation that we was cool with, that robbed us, and we was cool with them, and we was messing around with their gods and so forth, and that the Creator sent them first to destroy the Assyrians, and then they came into our land under the name Babylonian, the Chaldeans. Now look here, this is what we did. You know, after being chased out the land, going into Africa, and that, you know, Prophet Jeremiah caught up with us. You know, he caught up with us. This is everybody. It wasn't no 10 lost tribes. Then all the captains, this is Jeremiah 42. Then all the captains of the forces, and Johan the son of Ker, and Jezaniah the son of Hoshea, and all the people from the least of them even unto the greatest came near and said unto Jeremiah the prophet, that we beseech thee, our supplication be accepted before thee, and pray for us unto the Elohim that Yah, even for all this remain, for we are left but a fruit of many, as then eyes behold. Now, when you read the book of Jeremiah, you're going to see that we was in war. We was in war with the Babylonians. And man, they was getting the ups on us to finally, man, they done burnt the whole town down and we didn't have nowhere to stay. So we said, well, we're going to go back into Egypt and we're going to live there, thinking that we'll be cool up off the promised land, not knowing that the Creator done set the curses out for us long time ago, that if we should break the covenant and come up off that land, that would have awaited us. And that's what happened to us in the transatlantic slave trade. Look, then the Elohim that Yah made, and they said unto Jeremiah the prophet, this is Jeremiah 42:2, and said unto Jeremiah the prophet, let we beseech thee, our supplication be accepted before thee, and pray for us unto the Elohim that Yah, even for all this remain, for we are left but a fruit of many, as then eyes do behold, that the Elohim that Yah may show us the way wherein we may walk, and the things that we may do. Then Jeremiah the prophet said unto them, I have heard you, and behold, I will pray unto the Elohim your Yah, according to all the words, and it shall come to pass that whatever thing the Elohim shall answer you, I will declare it unto you. I will keep nothing back from you. So while we was going into Africa, on our way there, Prophet Jeremiah caught up with us. This is after the Scythians and them burnt the land up, Ashkenaz and them forcing us off. And then Prophet Jeremiah caught up with us. And then we told him, man, go pray to Almighty Yah and see what we should do. And whatever he say do, we gonna do it. So Jeremiah would go and talk to Almighty Yah. Then they said unto Jeremiah that the Elohim be a true and faithful witness between us, if we do not even according to all the things for which the Elohim thy Yah shall send thee to us, whether it be good or whether it be evil. See, we sold ourselves out by saying that. We will obey the voice of the Elohim our Yah, to whom we send thee, that it may be well with us when we obey the voice of the Elohim our Yah. And it come to pass after 10 days that the word of the Elohim came unto Jeremiah. Then called he Johanan the son of Ker, and all the captains of the forces which were with him, and all the people from the least even unto the greatest, and said unto them, he told us to go back to the land. He told us to go back to the land. But this is what we said. This is what we said. Then it come to pass when Jeremiah had made an end of speaking unto all the people, all the words of the Elohim their Yah, for which the Elohim their Yah had sent him to them, even all these words. Then spake Azariah the son of Hoshea, and Johan the son of Ker, and all the proud men, saying unto Jeremiah, Thou speakest falsely. The Elohim our Yah hath not sent thee to say, Go not into Egypt to sojourn there, but Baruch the son of Ner set thee against us, for to deliver us into the hand of the Chaldeans, that they might put us to death and carry us away captive unto Babylon. See, we sold ourselves out when we said that. We sold ourselves out when we said that. And then we would go into Africa to stay till the transatlantic slave trade started. Look, our whole land, man, was empty. Then the word that came to Jeremiah concerning all the Judeans which dwelt in the land of Egypt, which dwelt in Medigo and at Tapanas and at North, and in the country of Pethro, saying, This saith the Elohim of hosts, the Yah of Israel, ye have seen all the evil that I have brought upon Jerusalem and upon all the cities of Judah, and behold, this day they are a desolation, and no man dwelleth therein. See, we left the promised land during the Babylonian wars and went into Africa. Look here. You see this right here?
This is Africa right there. And then this map, what I'm showing, it's the satellite. It's a small distance. Look, man, a few miles. Man, it's a few miles. Look, from right here, man, from right here is the promised land. This is where we was. All right here. We was all right up in here. Look, we was all right up in here. And then we would run this little short distance. Look, we would run this little short distance. It's nowhere into Africa right here. This was the door right there. And then we would go all over here and live. Because all the wars that was happening up here, that we went here thinking we were safe. And then that's when later on the transatlantic slave trade started. That's why come all Africans wasn't taken from Africa. You know, if everybody was taken from Africa during the transatlantic slave trade, and they moved 100 million of us, that it wouldn't have been nobody in Ghana and all these places, you know, all these places that they didn't take no pygmies, they didn't take no Tutsis, they didn't take no Nigerians, they didn't take none of these folks from Africa and so forth, and that was just the transporting place on the West Coast, and then how they took us. You know, that's why come we got the title Negro, Black, African American, because that was a curse put on us, and that we don't represent the Africans and so forth because they still in their land. They still in their land, and they didn't go through the curses. That's how you know that they're not Israelites, and only the people from the transatlantic slave trade done been through those curses, because it said that you will be taken naked, thirsty, with a yoke of iron on your neck. And that's because we played with the Creator in the book of Jeremiah, when we was robbing and stealing and killing and had to get off the land. And then we told him to go ask what we should do after the enemies got the ups on us. You see, because we couldn't have the ups. You know what I'm saying? But we couldn't prosper. We couldn't prosper. We couldn't prosper robbing and killing and stealing from each other and so forth, and how we had to get off the land. And because we was familiar with Africa, Egypt already from dwelling there, and then how some of the Israelites ran there at different times, that we decided to go there. We decided to go there. And then, you know, we eventually went to these parts because Egypt was having wars. And then later on down the line, when the water and the stuff started drying up where we were, that we started to move around, and then that put us in conflict with the other Africans, and then them slave catchers and the folks that's been doing slavery ever since ancient Babylon days. That's where the Sephardists come from. You know, they are professional slavers. You know, they love them slave folks, and then that's where they come from. And then how that they would bring a slavery system on us that is identical to Babylon. This is where they come from. That they come from this land called Sipper, this part of Babylon called Sipper. And then if you look at the America whole administrative structure, all the way down to the naming the streets, to the judges, to the police, to everything, how the military go and how land is distributed and sold, that it comes from ancient Sipper. And that's where the Sephardians are from. These folks who got our heritage, you know, and that they was part of the groups that was in the promised land that would get our heritage. You know, after we ran off, they started saying that they was the children Israel from back then all the way to this day. And they are responsible for book writings and telling stories and so forth. So they created a lot of false history about us. They the ones that gave you the false name Negro, African American, and Black. And all them titles that was put on us. Not something that we sit down and study, because we had peoples in colleges reading their books and reading their history books that we wrote, that we didn't come up to the conclusion that we're African Americans, blacks, and Negroes. That's those peoples that put it on us, because they was from Babylon, and they had a system of enslaving folks already. So, the system that we got put on us come from ancient Babylon, identical to the slavery that they had. And when them groups enslaved folks, that they go to a similar situation. But our situation was taken to another extreme, is that we was looked up on as cattle, chattel slavery. You know what I'm saying? They looked up on us as animals, and we didn't have no rights and so forth. Not even the right of an animal. And that we was treated like animals, because those folks know that we had broke the covenant during the Babylonian wars, because it was their ancestors that they came and got us in Africa and chased us out during the Babylonian wars. That they was with Ashkenazi and them. So them two groups got our heritage and been calling themselves Israelites to this day. Now, it should be easy for you Israelites to understand that. Now you don't have to use that history that them Israelites in them camps use, because they use their history, not knowing that the people we abandoned our heritage to had to have a history under the Israelite title too. They developed an extensive history. Matter of fact, their history is longer than ours, being that we only had like 800 and something years under the covenant. And also minutes of history with the Hebrew Israelites that was taken to Babylon, that was captured, and that'll be them prophets' history right there. And that when they come back, it was only a few of them, and then when they come back, they got destroyed so fast that their history is blank. And then that's when the other people stepped in, and after they got rid of them, that they had come back from Babylon, and then they start claiming the Israelite heritage. Them Israelites got destroyed. Now, the picture that our enemies try to paint is that they are descended from these folks, and that the history was continuous. But I got videos explaining the exiles' history and how they got wiped out real fast, because it couldn't be two covenants or two history, one broken and one not broken. So the Creator got rid of them so fast, because when they come back from Babylon, they start doing the sins of the peoples on the land, and they got wiped out real fast. I'm talking about real fast, that it almost didn't leave a trace. So it's easy to wake up, what I'm saying, man, up out of your slavery created mentality. If you listen to me, the Israelite Brotherhood, I've been doing this history for a long time, and we done separated Jewish history from real Israelite history. When you read the history or look at the videos that I show on Israelite Brotherhood, you looking at pure Israelite history. That we done cut the Sephardi's in the Ashkenazi history out of our heritage, because they've been using our title for a long time, and a lot of Israelites don't know make the separations. They don't even know nothing about them groups, and how they just include all Israelite history into one a basket and so forth, when it's a difference. All right, this is a message from the Israelite Brotherhood. Easy to wake up. You don't have to be ignorant no more. You don't have to be black or so-called African American. Even though I know some of y'all gonna keep them old evil, wicked titles on you because you stubborn, just like the Israelite was when we left Egypt, and how that you didn't want to follow Moses' teachings. You didn't want to follow the Creator's teaching, and how you thought that you had it all, that them Israelites thought that they had it all figured out like you do, and then that's why we went into bondage, and then that's why you gonna stay ignorant, because you don't want to wake up to your Israelite heritage, and how you only accept what the slavery owners' descendants give us. Now I done showed you how we the Israelites, and it's real easy to follow if you listen to me. Shalom.